My sister slashed my daughter's birthday trampoline with a box cutter. I smiled and said one sentence that made them pale. It was supposed to be the happiest afternoon of my daughter's life. The sun was high, the air warm, balloons floated above the yard like little bursts of hope. Sophie was 7, glowing in her birthday crown, racing from table to show her friends the trampoline she had begged for all year. The laughter was the kind you feel in your chest, light, free, unstoppable. Parents clapped from folding chairs, neighbors snapped photos, and for one rare moment I allowed myself to believe this day would be untouched by family politics. Then I saw her, Jenna, my younger sister, slipping out of the garage with something in her hand. At first I thought it was a toy, maybe an extra decoration she had dug up, but as the sun caught it, the light flashed off metal. A box cutter. She didn't look frantic. She didn't look unhinged. She looked calm, intentional, like she had been waiting for this. She walked across the grass toward the trampoline where Sophie was still bouncing, laughing, waving for her aunt to watch. I felt the world tilt. The air thickened, sounds warped, the squeak of springs, the shouts of kids, all of it wrapped in the knowledge that something was about to snap, and before anyone could stop her, Jenna pressed the blade down. The sound was sharp, violent, final. The fabric tore in one clean stroke, shrieking like a wound opening. The kids scattered in panic, screams cutting through the air. Sophie froze in the center, her face crumpling as the trampoline sagged beneath her. Jenna stood there, her hand steady, her expression cold. My mother watched from the patio, arms crossed, lips pursed. Not in horror, but in quiet approval. That was the moment my daughter's joy shattered. But if you think this came out of nowhere, you're wrong. That cut, that blade, that act, it was years in the making. To understand why Jenna walked into a child's birthday party with a knife in her hand, you need to understand what it was like to grow up with her. If you want to understand what happened on Sophie's birthday, you have to go back with me, to the house where Jenna and I grew up. Because what she did with that blade wasn't born in a single afternoon. It was rehearsed, little by little, across decades. Jenna was 2 years younger than me, but she ruled the house like a storm cloud. When she screamed, the walls bent. When she sulked, the day collapsed around her. My mother's answer was always the same. Don't upset your sister. Those 4 words shaped my entire childhood. I learned early that anything of mine could vanish if Jenna wanted it. My science fair project, 2 weeks of late nights, a careful solar system with painted planets, was ruined the morning of the eye. Competition. I found Saturn snapped in half, dangling by its wire. When I pointed at Jenna, still holding the broken piece, my mother didn't scold her. She looked at me. Why would you leave it where your sister could reach it? On my 12th birthday, I unwrapped a small gold locket from my grandmother. It was delicate, precious. I wore it once before Jenna tore it from my neck during an argument. The chain broke. I cried. My mother sighed. She didn't mean it. Don't make her feel worse. And the moments that should have belonged to me, graduations, birthdays, holidays, were always hers. At my 15th birthday dinner, Jenna arrived at the table sulking because a boy at school had ignored her. My mother pushed the cake toward her, as if my birthday could be borrowed for her comfort. That was the rhythm. Jenna took, I yielded. She broke, I carried the blame. I perfected the art of silence, because silence kept the peace, and peace was the only reward I was offered. But silence also fed her. It taught Jenna that consequences would never reach her, that she could ruin anything and still be handed more. And when you grow up believing destruction is a kind of power, you don't stop when you become an adult. You sharpen it. That is why, years later, she could walk into my yard with a blade and think it was justified. And the spark that lit that fire didn't start with Sophie's trampoline. It started months earlier, with Maddie's bike. The first crack in this story didn't appear at Sophie's birthday. It showed up months earlier, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, in the form of a broken bike. Maddie, my niece, was riding up and down the sidewalk while Sophie pedaled beside her, laughing, trying to keep up. I was pouring lemonade when I heard the sound, a metallic snap followed by a shriek. By the time I reached the driveway, Maddie was on the ground, her knee scraped, her bike crumpled beneath her. Jenna rushed over, saw the twisted chain, and didn't even pause. She pointed at Sophie. "You broke it! You've ruined everything!" Her voice was sharp enough to slice the air. Sophie's face fell. She froze, clutching her handlebars. Confusion painted across her cheeks. "I didn't," she started. But Jenna cut her off. My mother swooped in right behind, arms folded, voice dripping with judgment. "Rebecca, your daughter needs to learn actions have consequences." I swallowed the urge to argue. Years of conditioning pressed down on me. I simply said, "We'll take the bike home. Mark can look at it." Sometimes the best weapon isn't shouting. It's proof. That night, Mark wheeled the bike into the garage. He's patient, meticulous, the kind of man who takes his time to find truth in screws and steel. He turned the bike over, examined the chain, tapped the frame, tested the welds. After 10 minutes, he looked up, his face serious. "This isn't Sophie," he said. "The weld was weak. The frame's defective. It could have given out at any moment." His words sent a chill through me. Maddie's accident hadn't been Sophie's fault. It could have been deadly. If she'd been on a hill, crossing a street. My breath caught at the thought. I wasn't going to let it go. I called the manufacturer. At first, they brushed me off. "Normal wear and tear," they said. But I knew better. I used the words that never fail to make companies nervous. Defective product, child safety, liability. By the end of the call, they agreed to replace the bike. By the next morning, an email sat in my inbox, confirmation not just of a replacement, but of an upgrade. The very model Maddie had been dreaming of, the one she'd begged her mother, for I stared at that email and felt a rare satisfaction. Finally, justice. Finally, proof Sophie wasn't to blame. Finally, a chance to give Maddie something better. I didn't tell Jenna. I didn't tell Maddie either. I wanted it to be a surprise. I pictured her face lighting up, the joy that might soften old grudges, maybe even heal something between us. But generosity only works when the other person is willing to see it as a gift. To Jenna, silence looked like betrayal. In her mind, Sophie had broken Maddie's bike, and now Sophie had a trampoline while Maddie had nothing. She twisted the truth until my act of kindness became an act of humiliation. And on Sophie's birthday, that twisted story was about to explode, in the form of a blade against brand new fabric. Sophie's birthday dawned like a picture-perfect day. The sun broke through clean skies, the air was warm but not heavy, and the yard smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass. I set out folding tables dressed in pink streamers, trays of cupcakes, and paper crowns waiting for tiny heads. And right in the center of it all stood the trampoline, her dream gift, shimmering as if it knew it was about to carry the weight of her happiness. Guests trickled in with wrapped presents and cheerful voices. Neighbors came with their children, cousins chased each other across the lawn, and for a moment the sound of laughter drowned out the memory of every tense holiday, every fight I'd grown up with. I let myself exhale, thinking maybe, just maybe, we could get through one day without a storm. Sophie was radiant. She bounced from person to person, her crown tilted sideways, her cheeks flushed with joy. She grabbed friends by the wrist, dragging them toward the trampoline as if unveiling a treasure chest. The squeak of the springs and the rhythm of her laughter filled the air like music. Parents clapped, phones recorded, and more than one voice called out, "She's so lucky." "What a wonderful mom you are, Rebecca." I smiled politely, but inside their words landed like fragile glass, because luck had nothing to do with it. I had clawed for every piece of stability my daughter now lived in. Still, I tucked the thought away. Today wasn't about me. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jenna. She stood apart, arms crossed, her smile too tight, her jaw rigid. Every time Sophie leapt higher, Jenna's eyes followed, narrowing. I knew that look. It was the same one she wore when I came home with a trophy, when I unwrapped a gift, when life dared to hand me something she didn't have. And beside her was my mother, Linda, surveying the yard like a critic at a play she hadn't wanted to attend. She gave curt nods to the decorations, a thin smile when someone complimented the setup, but her eyes kept returning to me, sharp, measuring, waiting for the moment she could call me out for showing off. The energy in the yard shifted. Guests laughed, children squealed, but beneath it all I felt a tremor, like the faint vibration before glass shatters. The trampoline held a circle of giggling children, Sophie's laughter loudest among them. But Jenna's silence grew heavier with every bounce. I tried to push it down, to keep my focus on the joy in front of me. But deep in my chest, I felt it. That old, familiar warning. The look on Jenna's face wasn't just jealousy. It was preparation. And I didn't know it yet. But while Sophie celebrated the happiest day of her young life, Jenna was already rehearsing its destruction. The laughter was still echoing when I noticed Jenna slip away. One moment she was standing at the edge of the yard, her arms folded like shields. The next, she was gone, swallowed by the shadow of my garage. I didn't follow. Maybe I should have. But after years of living with her tempers, I'd trained myself to ignore the little exits, the sulks, the theatrics. I thought she'd stepped away to cool down, to mutter something bitter under her breath before rejoining the crowd. Then she came back out. In her hand was something small, silver, catching. The sunlight. My heart misfired when I realized what it was. A box cutter. She walked with purpose, no hesitation, her eyes locked on the trampoline. The party noise dimmed in my ears, muffled by a growing roar inside my skull. Sophie was bouncing, her crown, slipping off as she laughed, calling out for her aunt to watch. Jenna didn't say a word. She stepped right up to the trampoline, pressed the blade into the taut surface, and dragged it across with one brutal stroke. The sound was unforgettable. A violent rip, fabric shrieking as the trampoline sagged under the weight of betrayal. Children screamed. A boy tumbled backward onto the grass. Sophie froze in the center, staring down at the torn fabric as if her happiness had just collapsed beneath her feet. Before anyone could process, Jenna slashed again. Another jagged tear split open. The trampoline drooped and died in seconds. The crown slipped from Sophie's head as her lips trembled, her voice cracking into a whisper that broke me more than the blade ever could. My trampoline. I rushed forward but stopped short. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, couldn't accept it. And then Jenna finally spoke, her voice calm, deliberate, almost smug. That's what happens when spoiled kids get what they don't deserve. The crowd was stunned into silence. Parents stared wide-eyed. Children clutched their mothers. My neighbor gasped audibly, whispering, "What's wrong with her?" And my mother. She didn't rush to comfort Sophie. She didn't scold Jenna. She folded her arms, nodded slowly, and said the words that carved deeper than any blade. "You shouldn't have bought it, Rebecca. You're just showing off." It was a scene so absurd I might have laughed if my daughter's eyes weren't filling with tears. A birthday had turned into a courtroom, with Jenna as executioner and my mother as judge. The silence was crushing. My instinct was to scream, to snatch the cutter from Jenna's hand, to shield Sophie from the wreckage. But years of surviving in this family had taught me something more powerful than rage. Sometimes silence cuts sharper, so I didn't shout. I didn't move. I just let the quiet hang in the air until even the children stilled. Then I smiled, and I spoke one sentence. Only one. that made both Jenna and my mother's faces drain of color. The box cutter slipped from Jenna's hand and clattered onto the grass. She looked satisfied, almost triumphant, as if she had proved some point only she understood. My mother stood a few feet away, chin lifted, arms folded, her approval radiating like a gavel striking down a verdict. The children huddled near their parents. The yard was frozen, held in a silence so sharp it could cut skin. Sophie gripped the hem of my dress, her small hand trembling, her eyes wide and wet. Every instinct in me screamed to lash out, to shout, to demand an apology. But instead, I felt something cold settle over me, clarity. I straightened, looked directly at Jenna, and smiled. "That trampoline," I said, my voice steady enough to quiet even the birds, "wasn't for Sophie. It was for Maddie." The effect was instant. My mother's lips parted, Jenna's face drained, her expression cracking like glass under pressure. A rush of whispers rippled through the crowd. Jenna blinked hard. "No," she snapped, too quickly. "It wasn't." "It was," I replied, calm as stone. "The company replaced Maddie's defective bike. I fought for it. I pushed them until they agreed to upgrade her to the model she'd been begging for." "That trampoline," I gestured to the sagging ruin, "was hers." Gasps erupted. Neighbors exchanged looks. A father muttered, "You've got to be kidding." Jenna's voice wavered. "You're lying. You always twist things." "About what?" I asked. "I have the emails, the paperwork. Do you want me to pull them up now, or would you prefer I read them out loud? Here, in front of everyone." The color drained further from her face. Her bravado faltered, replaced by a flash of panic. She glanced at my mother for rescue. But even Linda, with all her practiced authority, couldn't steady herself. She clicked her tongue, shaking her head. "Rebecca, stop being dramatic. You don't need to humiliate your sister." I turned toward her, my voice low and even. "I'm not the one who brought a blade to a child's birthday party." The silence that followed was heavier than rage. The neighbors weren't whispering anymore. They were staring. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her lips pressed into a thin, rigid line. Jenna's arms folded across her chest so tightly her knuckles went white. Behind me, Sophie's hand slipped into mine, and from the porch, Mark finally stepped forward, his voice calm but final. "It's time for both of you to leave." The door closed behind them with a hollow finality. Not slammed, not shouted shut, just sealed, as if the house itself had decided it had absorbed enough. The silence that followed was thick, alive, pressing in around us. Mark moved back into the kitchen, stacking paper plates with slow, steady hands. Sophie curled on the couch with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, her birthday crown abandoned on the floor. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the day had pressed her down. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, phone still in my hand. Notifications buzzed in steady bursts. Calls from Jenna, voicemails from my mother, messages stacked one after another. I didn't open them. I already knew the script. First, I'd be accused of overreacting, then begged to smooth things over, and finally, threatened with guilt until I folded. But something inside me had shifted. Watching Jenna cut through a child's joy with a blade, watching my mother defend it, had burned away the last of my excuses. I realized that peace in this family was nothing more than a ransom I'd been paying for decades, and I was done paying. Opened the banking app on my phone. My card was tied to their lives in more ways than I could count. Utility bills, grocery orders, streaming services, even cell phone plans. Every month I had covered their shortfalls, convincing myself it was kindness. But to them it wasn't kindness at all. It was entitlement. They treated my help like a debt they were owed, not a gift freely given. One by one I cut the cords. Click, electric bill removed. Click, groceries severed. Click, phones, subscriptions, accounts. Every press of my finger felt like lifting, Another stone from my chest. The buzzing of my phone grew frantic. First came Linda's voice, sharp and scolding. "Rebecca, put the card back. Don't do something you'll regret." Then Jenna's, venom dripping between her sobs. "You're punishing Maddie. How could you be so cruel? Fix this now." I let the messages play out into silence. For the first time, their desperation didn't wrap around my throat. It couldn't touch me. Because here's what they never understood. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are survival. And that night, standing in my quiet kitchen, I drew a line in the sand so deep it could never be crossed again. But if you think Jenna and my mother would let go quietly, you don't know them. When they lost control of me, they turned to the only weapon they had left: control of the story. The next morning, the silence cracked. My phone lit up not with apologies, not with shame, but with a storm of carefully crafted lies. In the extended family group chat, the one still decorated with old reunion photos and birthday wishes, Jenna and my mother had begun their counterattack. Their words came fast, polished, rehearsed. Rebecca humiliated us in front of the whole neighborhood. Sophie destroyed Maddie's bike months ago, and Rebecca refused to replace it. She bought that trampoline only to flaunt her money, to rub it in Maddie's face. Line after line, they built a new reality, brick by brick, painting me as the villain and themselves as the wounded martyrs. And worse, people believed them. Aunts responded with teary emojis. Cousins typed, "Out so unfair, poor Maddie." One relative wrote, "Rebecca has always thought she was better than everyone." The chorus grew, each message twisting the knife. And then came the one that stopped me cold. At least Jenna is raising Maddie to be humble, unlike Sophie. They weren't just smearing me anymore. They were targeting my daughter, my 7-year-old, who had only wanted to bounce in her crown and eat cupcakes with her friends. That was the moment something inside me broke loose. I had endured their slander my whole life. Every twisted story, every scapegoat version of me they fed to the family. But I would not let them smear Sophie. So I opened my security app. The camera above the porch had caught everything. Jenna walking, out of the garage with the box cutter in hand, Sophie's laughter turning into a gasp, the violent rip of fabric, children scattering, and my mother's cold voice blaming me instead of comforting her granddaughter. It was all there, raw, undeniable, damning. I didn't edit it. I didn't trim a second. I downloaded the clip and dropped it straight into the group chat. No commentary, no rant, just one line beneath the video. For the record, this trampoline was Maddie's. Jenna destroyed it herself. And then I set the phone down. The effect was instantaneous. The thread detonated. All caps messages flooded in. "What is this? Are you serious?" Cousins typed WTF like they were pounding on their keyboards. Aunts sent shocked face emojis in endless strings. The quiet ones, the ones who had believed Jenna's story but never spoke up, finally chimed in with anger. At her, not me. The lies unraveled before their eyes, exposed under the unforgiving light of video evidence. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. But as the chaos poured through my screen, all I felt was exhaustion. Because if there's one truth about people like Jenna and my mother, it's this. The truth doesn't end the war. It only makes them fight dirtier. And the proof of that was coming. Because while the family chat burned, the video was already slipping out beyond it, carried by cousins, neighbors, and eventually landing in the one place Jenna couldn't afford for it to land, her husband's hands. The video didn't stay contained in that family chat. By evening, it had slipped out, forwarded to cousins, then to neighbors, and within hours, posted on Facebook with the caption, "Who does this at a child's birthday party?" My phone buzzed nonstop. Friends sent wide-eyed emojis. Parents from Sophie's school texted me, "I can't believe this is real." Even strangers commented on the post, calling Jenna cruel, unfit, heartless. The truth had finally grown legs, and it was running faster than Jenna could chase it. And then came the call I never expected. The name flashing across my screen made my stomach twist. Jenna's husband. He rarely spoke to me. He always kept his distance, quiet and exhausted, like a man living in a house where the walls never stopped shaking. For a moment, I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice was low, flat. "Rebecca, is it real?" I closed my eyes. Yes, every second of it. He didn't respond right away. All I heard was the long, shaky exhale of a man whose worst suspicion had just been confirmed. "Thank you," he said finally, and then he hung up. 2 days later, the real explosion came. Word spread through the family. He had filed for divorce. Not only that, he was seeking full custody of Maddie. The fallout was instant. My phone lit up with frantic messages from my mother. "You've destroyed your sister's marriage. You know what you've done?" She called me cold, vindictive, ungrateful. Jenna sent voice messages, her words swinging wildly between rage and desperation. "You ruined me, Rebecca. You ruined everything. Fix this. Fix it." But I hadn't ruined anything. I had only pressed play. The video spoke for itself. And, for the first time, someone outside of me had seen Jenna clearly, not as the victim she always pretended to be, but as the storm that had been tearing through lives for years, and the shockwaves didn't stop at their marriage. Friends pulled away from her. Other parents whispered about Maddie at school. Even relatives who had blindly defended Jenna now fell into awkward silence, unable to argue with evidence staring them in the face. But instead of retreating, my mother doubled down. If Jenna's husband had chosen to leave, then according to her, it was my fault. And she was about to unleash a fury that made every birthday insult and childhood slight look small. The divorce papers hit my family like a grenade, but instead of facing the wreckage, my mother turned the shrapnel toward me. Her calls came at all hours, sharp, clipped, and furious. "Rebecca, you've gone too far. You don't humiliate family. You don't air dirty laundry for strangers to gawk at. Do you know what people are saying about Jenna? Do you know what you've cost her?" Her words poured like acid, each one trying to corrode my resolve. But I didn't flinch. "She did this to herself," I told her. I just pressed play. That answer drove her wild. My mother's voice dropped to a hiss, trembling with rage. Family stands together no matter. "What? You don't cut ties? You don't cut money? You don't cut blood?" I let her finish. Then I said the words that seemed to freeze her mid-breath. "Blood isn't family. Safety is." The silence on the line stretched long, sharp as glass. Then she hung up. But her campaign didn't stop with me. She went to the relatives, spinning her own gospel. According to her, I wasn't just cold. I was cruel, vindictive, power-hungry. She whispered that Sophie was spoiled, that I was raising her to be entitled, that Jenna was the true victim of my arrogance, and the whispers worked on some aunts who had once hugged me at Christmas now avoided my texts. Cousins who had applauded me for being strong the day I dropped the video now muttered that maybe I should have kept it private. Even neighbors, people who had seen the footage with their own eyes, shifted uneasily in conversation, reluctant to take sides. I understood then that truth doesn't end wars. It starts louder ones. The video hadn't silenced Jenna or my mother. It had only pushed them into desperation, and desperation makes people dangerous. Meanwhile, Maddie was caught in the middle. I saw her one weekend with her father. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes tired. She waved at Sophie, a small flicker of light in the storm, but there was a heaviness around her. Children know when their world is shifting, even if no one explains. Why? That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she asked the question that tore me open. "Mom, are Aunt Jenna and Grandma still our family?" I swallowed hard. "They'll always be our relatives," I said carefully. "But family is supposed to make you feel safe. And sometimes, when people hurt you over and over, they stop being family and start being something else." Her little head nodded like she understood. But the weight of it crushed me. Because in that moment, I realized the battle wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my daughter from a cycle I'd endured my whole life. And while I thought the war had reached its peak, I was wrong. My mother and Jenna weren't done yet. They had one last card to play, the rewriting of history itself. For a few weeks, the noise quieted. The calls slowed. The messages came less often. It was almost eerie, like the eye of a storm. Part of me wanted to believe it was over, that they had finally accepted the line I'd drawn. But I should have known better. The final strike came, in whispers, not screams. One evening, a cousin sent me screenshots. A new group chat had formed, one I hadn't been invited to. At the top of the thread were the usual suspects: my mother, Jenna, and a handful of relatives who had always preferred the easy comfort of siding with them. But this wasn't just a smear campaign anymore. This was a full-scale rewrite of the past. According to them, Sophie had always been difficult, prone to tantrums and cruelty. According to them, I had been selfish since childhood, showing off at every milestone, lording my career over the family, using money as a weapon. They painted a version of me so distorted it barely resembled a human being, let alone the daughter and sister they were describing. And the worst part? Some of the relatives nodded along. They added their own embellishments, false memories that had never happened. Suddenly, my 15th birthday cake was proof of me demanding attention. My college graduation was twisted into an example of me rubbing success in Jenna's face. It was like watching my life dragged into a funhouse, mirror where every reflection came back warped. I stared at the screen, and for once, I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel shock. I felt tired. Because I realized this was all they had left. If they couldn't control my money, or my silence, or the truth caught on video, then they would try to control the past. And maybe once, that would have worked. Maybe the old me would have jumped in, argued point by point, pleaded with relatives to see reason. But the woman standing in my kitchen that night was not the girl they raised. I didn't need their approval anymore. So I typed a single message back to the cousin who had warned me, "Let them rewrite the past. I'll build the future." And in mine, Sophie will never grow up fearing the people who call themselves family but act like enemies. And that was it. I muted the thread. I didn't answer another call. I didn't explain myself to anyone. For the first time in my life, I stepped out of their story and chose my own. But walking away from the wreckage forces you to face one final question, the kind that lingers in the silence after the storm. If family can do this to you, then what does family really mean? Nights are always the truest test. When the house is quiet, when Sophie's breathing drifts steady from her bedroom, when Mark's hand rests warm against mine, the noise of the day fades and only the real questions remain. For years, I thought family meant obligation. It meant answering calls even when I knew they'd end with me crying in the bathroom. It meant pulling out my wallet to cover bills while listening to accusations that I was selfish. It meant swallowing lies to keep the peace and letting my daughter believe that silence was safety. But silence had never been safety. It had been a prison. Watching Jenna press that blade into a trampoline wasn't just about fabric tearing. It was about seeing decades of small cuts made visible in one violent moment. And hearing my mother defend it was the final confirmation. Their definition of family was loyalty at all costs, even if the cost was my daughter's happiness. So I redefined the word. Family, to me, is not the people who share your blood. It's the people who protect your joy instead of destroying it. It's the voices that lift you when the world is heavy, not the ones that weigh you down to keep you small. Family is the hand that steadies you, not the one that holds a blade. When Sophie looked at me and asked if Jenna and my mother were still our family, I knew I had a choice. I could pass down the cycle I grew up in, or I could break it. So I broke, not for revenge, not for pride, for her, for us. For a life where love isn't conditional, and silence doesn't mean surrender, it means a boundary that keeps the poison out. The trampoline was ruined. The party was ruined. The relationships I had clung to my whole life were in ashes. But in their place, something sharper, clearer, and far more valuable rose. Freedom. I tucked Sophie into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered what I wish someone had told me when I was her age. You did nothing wrong. You are safe, and you are loved. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not the stories they spin, not the history they rewrite. The truth remains, family isn't a word they get to own anymore. It's mine. And it belongs to the life I'm building, not the one I left behind. So I leave you with the question that lingers long after the shouting dies down. If it had been you standing in that yard, hearing fabric tear under a blade and watching your child's joy collapse, what would you have done? In the end, this wasn't just about a ruined trampoline. It was about breaking free from a cycle of silence and finally protecting the only family that truly mattered, my daughter. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this left you thinking about what family really means, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because more stories like this are coming.